So it is March 18th, 10:02, and this is our Finance Committee. And I'll throw this over to Angie because I think she has the agenda.
Yep, we do. We'll throw it up on the screen. Thank you, Sarah. All right, so we will go through the financial statements that were sent out yesterday. We have budget amendment number 1 on the agenda for Monday's council meeting, so I wanted to talk to you about that. We also have a couple of guest speakers. Sarah Bisson will be giving us a grant update. She's been really busy, so I know she's been submitting a lot and receiving a lot and coming to council with a lot of them, so I thought it would be a good time for her to come and give us an update. Chief Tyree is on the line to talk about the EMS levy that's coming up in April. Very important to us as well. So I know the union's been gearing up to do some promotion of that. So I asked him to speak about what's going on. And then the mayor's update, we have the American Rescue Plan coming up. I know there's been a lot of talk about that. So she had a meeting and got some details. So we'll hear from her on that. And then also the mayor and council budget roles and kind of a refresher on MRSC's mayor and council member handbook. I know council had a retreat a few evenings ago and just thought it would be kind of an idea to have a little refresher because there was a lot of discussion on roles and who does what. So, and then our next meeting will be April 22nd. So with that, I'll jump into the financial statements. So I included a copy of the executive summary narrative that was sent out yesterday and posted online. So we're looking really good. Sarah, if you want to scroll down a little bit, I'll talk about where we're at with the taxes. So our tax revenues looking good. Property taxes are up. Those should even out by the end of the year. We can only receive so much based on our levy, so that should level out. Sales taxes were up 8% versus February of last year. Utility taxes are looking good, up 5%. Building permits is still really high. They've been really busy. They've been doing a ton of new installs and it's just been going crazy over there. So that's good to see that it's still growing. Hotel motel taxes, I sent a note along with the email to council that in January of 2020, we received some catch-up money. So if you take that into consideration and compare February to February with that excluded, we're actually up 8% instead of down 5%. So I just wanted to point that out. Real estate excise tax, really high up there as well at 171, and that's due to the property stuff going on in the city as well. And the gas taxes are trending down. That's pretty typical. We can't really control that. It's the money we get from the state. Wanted to point out there's a couple of funds that I have on kind of a watch list. You'll notice the convention center revenues are below target. That's just because they've been delayed in starting their events due to COVID. So once that event start up, that should start leveling back off. The thing I look for is to make sure the expenses are trending in line with the revenues, and the expenses are actually lower below target. So that's a good sign. We haven't hired back all of our staff. We're not spending money because we're not doing events. So as long as the revenues stay higher than the expenses, that's kind of what I'm looking for. And then the shared utility, that Fund 439 is another area that we've been watching. So that's our utility billing fund. It's where all of the costs for utility billing department are charged out of. The reason that revenue is lagging is due to the governor's order on not being able to collect late fees and penalties on the utilities. So I compared 2019 to 2020, and in 2020, we were actually down $80,000 And if you remember at the end of the year, we had a budget amendment where we had to transfer some utility money into the shared utility fund to cover that deficit. And we've also spent through our fund balance. So I have that one on the list for potential American Rescue Plan funds. One of the allowed uses is replacing lost revenue. So as we dive into that stimulus funding, that should be something we look at. It is lost revenue, and unfortunately, if we continue to not be able to collect the fees and penalties, we have to bear more of the cost to the utilities and transfer money out of there. So that's not really the intent. So we'll keep an eye on that and talk about that as we progress into that rescue plan funding as well. Everything else is looking really good, on target. Any questions on the financials? Catherine?
Yeah, thanks, Angie. With regards to the hotel motel tax catch up, you say we would be up about 8%. When will that be booked? When will we see that? And will there need to be a budget amendment for that?
No, so it came in January of 2020. So if you look at that 120,000 on the 2020 line, that contains some catch-up funding. So if you take that money out and actually compare, apples to apples for 20 and 21, it would actually be up 8%. So it's already been the revenue was received last year, but I don't want, because it looks skewed here, it looks like we're down, but if you take out that money that was a one-time thing, we'd actually be up 8. So
okay, I misunderstood. I thought it was something that you got this year.
Nope, last year.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yep. Okay, John?
Yeah, that two things that may help, and I just know that just because we're right now that in my businesses that this month we look like that we're going to have the best month ever just because of the comps. And so one of the things that we've started looking at is looking at what our numbers were in 2019 as a comp period, especially on the hotel. So that might be helpful just to put it in perspective. So we take the coronavirus conversation out, and we're probably going to get this later, but I know that in talking with the PUD, they have the same issue that we have with water, with the shutoffs. And they're like over $1 million. So do we have what our numbers are?
I could run some updated receivable reports and see where we're at. I think I sent those out last time as well, just kind of a snapshot on the aging report. We're definitely not at $1 million. I know that. I know just for the fines and penalties, we took a hit of 80,000 in 2020. And we haven't been able to collect any so far this year in 2021. So if it continues, we typically collect about 120,000 a year on a normal year. So depending on when we can start doing that again, we'll have to figure out what that funding looks like. But yeah, I can send out some new aging reports. We can attach them to the handouts that we post online and send them out to council.
Okay, thanks.
Can I sort of piggyback on what John said with regards to using the 2019 numbers as comparisons because of basically the anomaly in 2020? I wonder how hard it would be to put 2019 in this little year-to-date comparison and add a column. Would that be difficult to do?
No, not at all. That's on the plan for March. It seems like March is when stuff started happening. So January and February are pretty normal months, but yeah, heading into March, I think that's when we started really getting the COVID stuff going. So in March financials, I can definitely add a line for 2019 and do that.
I think that would be incredibly helpful to really provide context to how we're really doing sans some giant emergency, particularly when I think when we get to the convention center, because I would assume they took a massive hit with just because of the lack of revenue.
Yeah.
As another question, if it's okay, if with the guidance that I've seen and you mentioned on the ARP, the rescue plan, if we use the funding for to backfill fees for late payments, then by extension, I would presume that those would be forgiven to the customer. Is that right?
Mayor, I'm not sure how that works. I think the mayor's gonna talk about that. She met with
Okay.
Representative Kilmer, I think. So she'll be talking about that a little later, and it's something we definitely want to know the answer to, because that's a good point. If we're using the revenue for that, does it just get wiped off the accounts? So we'll have
Yeah,
to.
I'm sorry.
And I can answer that real quickly. I don't know either. That was not something that was discussed. But it is something that we would have to find out exactly how that worked. And, you know, some of the people you know are really struggling, and others are chronic people who, you know, take every opportunity not to pay. So whether that's, you know, whether we would want to forgive those or not in that manner, we'll just have to look at it. So much is going to depend on the actual wording and how they're going to interpret things.
Right. I just say it started to occur to me when the PUD was speaking about it on a recent webinar or Zoom meeting. And if we get money from the relief fund, it would seem to me that if they then, or we then collect from the people, regardless of whether they're a prior bad actor or not, that would be double dipping. And it doesn't seem, even if they allowed you to do it, it doesn't seem fair. So, I don't know.
Well,
Just a
on the
thought.
other hand, it's money that is provided us to help us through this in a variety of ways. So it might not, you know, if it's a forgiveness, it might not be the best way to use that funding. So we might look for other things that are more direct for people, because there's a variety of things in this new stuff that wasn't there before in CARES.
Right.
Okay. Any other financial questions? All right, so we'll dive into the budget amendment. Okay, so this is the big summary page. Can you guys see that very end right column? The ending fund balance change?
I can.
Okay.
Yes.
So you'll see that the changes, I'll go through the detail down here in a few minutes, but I just wanted to point out the changes are pretty minimal except for two numbers that you'll notice. In Fund 320, we have the $90,000 adjustment. That was already approved by council, I think at our first meeting in January. And that was for the evaluation of wells that Nick's currently working on. And then the other big one down in storm drain is $47,150. That one is due to us not receiving the aquatic weed spraying invoice until March of 2021. So they came in on budget, on contract, no increase in costs. It was just a timing issue of when we received the invoice. It didn't get paid in 2020 because we didn't have an invoice. So we have to re-budget those funds in 2021 to cover that cost. So I'll talk a little bit more about that though when we get to that one. Sarah, if you want to go to the next summary This is the Exhibit A. And you'll see this is just kind of the fund balance, the placement of where those ended. So general fund still 2.195 million, so very minimal impact there. Going down to that capital replacement fund, we're still in a good point there, even with the $90,000 adjustment. We're still at 2.1 million. And then going down to storm drain fund 438, with that rebudget of the weed spraying invoice, we're still at about $47,000. So fund balances still look good after the revisions. All right, if we go on to the next page, it's the detail of the revenue adjustments. So the first one, council approved the police fingerprint system grant. So that's just booking an entry to get the revenues in the system. The second two there are due to the change in the radio station bylaws. So the changes have the radio station remitting all of their revenue to the city and the city paying all of their expenses. So we added 2 revenue codes to make sure we're tracking that. We have a fee code as well as a donation code. And these were the amounts that were estimated based on the radio station's financial reports. So we took the financial reports they provide us and times that by 2 to come up with these budget estimates for their revenues.
Hey, Angie,
Yeah, go ahead.
just before we go off of that, I'm just the donations, which I understand the donations. So they sell spots on the radio, and I know that because I do it. So does the radio station, whatever the income that comes in, do they write a check to the city? Is that how that works?
They are supposed to direct their vendors to write the checks to the city and mail them directly to the city. So the radio station should not be getting any more payments made out to them. They should all be directed to send it directly to us with a note that says it's for the radio station so that we can book it in our system.
Oh, okay. I'm wondering if their documentation has changed because we just are in the process of renewing, and it was to the radio station.
Yeah, I think, and Sarah, you can jump in here at any time. I know Sarah's been working with the radio board on this, but they didn't want to make the change until council approved all the codes because I wouldn't have a place to put them right now if they came here. So we're kind of waiting for council to approve this budget amendment. And then that's when all the new changes will take effect because we don't really have a place to put anything until council says he's good.
Okay.
That's the way I have said it to them also, is that we didn't want to make any moves or change any documentation or anything like that, because then it would be all for nothing if it wasn't approved to be done that way.
Okay.
So going down to the Fund 101, the street amendments, we had some residual interest earnings in the 4 funds that we were closing out in the budget. So we were closing out the Safe Routes to Schools, which is Fund 304. The 372 is the
Point Brown.
Point Brown. Yep. Thank you, Catherine. Fund 381 is Razor Clam. And then Fund 205 is one of our old bond funds. So to zero those out, I had to make some minor adjustments to move those interest earnings as well to get those down to 0. So that's what those are. And then the Fund 104 is the PPE grant that council approved on March 8th. And that's it for the revenue side. Okay, and then on the expense side, we'll dive into the radio. So council allotted them $32,500 in the 2021 and 2022 budget. I zeroed out that line item because we created a new department within the general fund for the radio station. We wanted to be able to clearly track their revenues and expenses and help them with their financial reporting. So we created a 570 department specifically for radio. So the first adjustment is just zeroing out their prior budget. And then down towards the bottom, you'll see, I think there's 6 line items that we added for the radio station. And these amounts total the 32,500 that council allotted, plus the 13,600 in revenue that they'll be bringing in. So basically the revenues, the expenses, and the amount that council gave them, that all nets out to 0. I know that's kind of confusing, but they shouldn't be making a profit and they shouldn't be costing us any more than what we allotted them during the budget. So does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
The other 2 line items in the general fund there are just the fingerprint system grant and grant match that council approved on January 25th. Going down to Fund 104, that's the expense side for the PPE grant that was approved on March 8th for the EMS fund. And then going down, the next 2, Fund 205 and Fund 304 are the, again, closing out those funds that we do no longer use. So those just match the revenue side on those. Fund 320 is that well money that you approved on January 11th, the 90,000. And then Sarah, if you could scroll down a little bit. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Fund 372 and 381 are again those fund closeouts. And then Fund 438 is that aquatic weed payment that got rebudgeted for 2021. Any questions on the expenses?
So I have a question.
Okay.
The contract we just approved with Doug for spraying for 2021, that's not in this budget amendment. Is that correct?
That is correct. That money was already budgeted.
Oh, okay, that's right. Okay, sorry. Forget I asked that. I'll wrap it up to being a newbie.
Then down on the next page is just the summary that we presented at the last Finance Committee meeting. It just shows what council has already approved by agenda item, the bars codes. You asked us to add kind of the status of each one of those. They're all in process still, but as we start checking those off, we'll update those as necessary.
And that would be the where you say the completion date and total expensed. That's the status columns.
Yep.
Cool.
All right. Any questions on Budget Amendment 1?
Nope.
All right. I will turn it over to Sarah Bisson for a grant update.
Sarah, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Hello, I muted my phone, but not the system. Good morning, Finance Committee. I have prepared a spreadsheet for you today that illustrates our open and active grants and our pending applications and potential projects that I am actively seeking funding for. I'll give Sarah a second to get that up there.
One sec.
It's kind of a big spreadsheet. It's got a lot of information on it. So if we have to, we can collapse one of the columns or something if we need to format it to fit this meeting better. Perfect. I know it's kind of small type here, but I'd like to start at row number 4. This is going to be our active grants. That's our first section. I think maybe the best way to go about this is to address it by section and then take any questions. The first one is the Surface Transportation Grant Set Aside. This was from the Cowlitz-Wahkiakum Council of Governments, an appropriation for the High Dune Trail, and it ends on 6/30/2022, and we are on track with that funding. Robert's been working diligently with getting a contractor on board and working on construction for the High Dune Trail. The second is the No Child Left Inside grant, funded through the Recreation and Conservation Office with the state of Washington. This was for the summer youth program to purchase Chromebooks and field backpacks. Unfortunately, that program did not occur last summer as anticipated. I reached out to the funding agency, and a lot of programs are obviously in the same position as we are due to the pandemic. So we will be requesting an extension of performance period, and I will be working with Bob to do so. The third is the Assistance to Firefighting Power Cots and Equipment Grant, funded through FEMA. Those have been purchased. The equipment was purchased, but they extended the grant period, and I believe we have about $1,400 left to spend. We have until September 22nd to do so. Moving down the line, we have the Airport Improvement Program that was funded in 2018 for an environmental assessment for obstruction removal. We are in the process of finalizing that environmental assessment. Grant closeout should occur, I would imagine, by the end of this quarter, if not next quarter, potentially, depending on when FAA has the chance to complete their final review and accept that environmental assessment. But it has been performed by the consultant. I would estimate we're about 95% complete. What is not included on this list was the expired matching portion. We're at the end of the grant, and we've spent the matching portion from WASDOT, the Aviation Department from Washington State. They did fund 5% of our match. So we did not end up paying the $30,000 in the matching amount, but that is what was required for the Airport Improvement Program for this function. It was a pretty penny for the environmental assessment to be conducted. Fortunately, we might be able to use that information moving forward with potential hangar builds and activities at the airport. This also lists the NCHIP, the National Criminal History Improvement Program, for the second electronic fingerprinting equipment at the PD. And Officer McManus retired and has passed that on to another officer. I'm working with him to begin procurement of that. And we have until the end of the year to get that implemented. What I have done here from row number 9 through row number 13, I have clearly depicted the funds allocated in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The first listed here is the $20,000 for the CARES Act airport grant. We have 4 years to expend that for operations, maintenance, and matching to grant funds. Potential projects I've been discussing with FAA have been included, have included maintenance of the runway and potential replacing the eroding fence, because we had a large chunk fall during the ice storm, but that's not the only area of concern. Maintenance has identified that the fence is eroding in several places. We have the Assistance to Firefighters COVID-19 supplemental on row number 10. This was their first round for PPE funding, and that has been nearly expended. I think there's about $8 left on that, and they were awarded their second round of funding for the same purpose, PPE, which we asked quite a bit more after seeing the need and what we expended this past year. So that was approved by council at the last meeting. Then we have the Library CARES Act for PPE, although it just expired, and I just realized I should have removed that from this list, but they did expend that entirely on PPE. The last row in the active section is number 13, and that's also a Library CARES Act appropriation for Wi-Fi hotspots. Unfortunately, the library is going to return those funds. Their budget does not support the continuing cost after the initial purchase with grant funding. So the grant funding would support the cost of the equipment, but not the continuous monthly cost. So it is unfortunate, but they are going to have to return that funding. And that was kind of a different funding mechanism as well, in that they fronted us the money, and that's not typical in the grant world. We're typically reimbursed by funding agencies, and it was provided to us, and we accepted it kind of after they gave us the money, because it was just kind of an odd process with that. So we will be returning those funds. So that's what we have active and running right now, full award. Are there any questions in regard to the active section?
I have a question, Sarah. When you say
Sure.
when you say they return the funds, do I infer then that they never bought the routers?
No, they did not. They had looked into a few different vendors to supply that, to see how much the funds would actually support. And the $2,000 did not purchase the 4 hotspot routers that they had anticipated. And then there was the continuous cost in order to support those. So it ended up to be quite a financial impact to the library budget, from my understanding with my discussion with KSEF.
Is this something that might be possible to do for the new ARP funds, with the ARP funds?
I have not seen any guidance on those funds as of yet, but I anticipate getting that anytime. So I would imagine that it may be something we could support, and we have until August to expend these funds. So maybe it would behoove us to hang on to that award for just a little while longer until we receive better guidance on those ARP funds, and then see if we could perhaps, if that's something that the city was interested in doing.
AWC has some preliminary guidance. It sounds like it's a lot looser expectation-wise. That's just a thought on my part, that with over 1.4 million, there's it's almost 5 times as much as we got last time. So it's something to consider. Not my decision.
Absolutely.
Obviously.
Well, I think
And I imagine
I'm sorry, one of the things it wouldn't solve, though, is the ongoing expense. So that would be something that we would have to find out how much that is, and, talk to the library and see if that's, if it works for them to do that. And even if we gave them more money, would they rather spend that more money on something else?
Sarah?
Yes, I would.
I've got
Yes.
a couple questions. That, first of all, this is a great document. Appreciate that. And is this document stored someplace on FilePro?
No, I specifically prepared this for this meeting, but I imagine that Sarah will be able to place that on there.
Okay, because I would like to have that included in the finance committee documents that we have. So that'd be great. And I don't know if this is a working document, but I really appreciated you being able to tell us how much money was left, or that it had been spent. And I was just wondering if this was a working document, if that could just be included.
I can certainly update that with the budget figures provided. the expenses thus far.
Yeah, no, it really helps me to be able to see everything there, and what a great job that you're doing on this. So I appreciate that.
This,
Well, thank you.
yeah, I was thinking the same thing. This is similar to the one we've received a couple times on a big 11 by whatever 14 spreadsheet, right, Sarah? This is something you created, and I think at least twice we've received these in our council packets.
I work with Angie regularly to try and determine on the audit side how much federal funding we have expended. So I do try and keep track of this. I don't always update it with what has been expensed thus far because it's always a moving target, but
Right.
that is something I could provide on a regular basis or even a quarterly basis, perhaps. It's something we could discuss. I could present it to Finance Committee on a quarterly basis, but yes, this is a very similar document. I did take an outline from what you have seen before because why recreate the wheel?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's great. I appreciate it.
Are there any further questions in regard to the active section of this document? Okay, moving along, I separated out the legislative appropriations just because they're a little bit different than the grant process. They're tracked a little differently. They came to us in a different kind of fashion, although we end up needing to create a contract with the Washington State Department of Commerce. The first one on row 15 is the vertical evacuation tower legislative appropriation. That's a tough word for me for some reason. This is specifically for the construction and design of the vertical evacuation tower. We will receive $490,000 of their appropriation after the Department of Commerce takes their fee. They keep a small fee, a percentage of each contract. So we receive $490,000. The documentation needed to initiate that contract has been submitted to the Department of Commerce. It's in their wheelhouse now to initiate that contract after they review those documents. It is anticipated, because I reached out to the Department of Commerce and said, we've had slow going last year on these projects because of the pandemic. Again, a lot of agencies are in the same position as we are. And she said that these contracts can extend until June 30th, 2023. So I anticipate that's when these grant funds will expire, or these appropriations will expire. Row number 16 is in regard to the High Dune Trail, again, funded through the legislative appropriation and the Washington State Department of Commerce. This is for construction and design of the High Dune Trail in the amount of $137,200. The contract can be extended until June 30th, 2023, and the documentation needed to initiate that contract has been submitted. Row number 17 is the sewer treatment plant erosion study. We were awarded this funding in the amount of $151,900. Again, this is after the Department of Commerce has taken their fee. This is to study the erosion issues at the jetty and surrounding the sewer treatment plant. And unfortunately, we will be returning these funds because the Army Corps has not participated in this project as anticipated. Nick has reached out to them several times, and unfortunately, I think they have higher priority projects elsewhere. So we will be returning these funds. We had thought about rescoping them, but it seems to behoove the city to, instead of trying to change the scope or go through that, to give the legislature back their funding so they can reappropriate it where they see fit. And then if we have another scope, we can propose that at a later date. Is there any questions in regard to that section?
I just have
Yeah.
one. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I walk every day, and maybe every couple weeks I go down what I call the hidden beach. It's the west side of the bay behind the sewer plant. There was significant erosion on that beach this year. So I would encourage us not to completely forget about this. It almost looks on the east side of the sewer plant, along that side where the wildlife preserve is, it almost looks like waterfront property for the sewer plant. So there was a lot of erosion this year.
Okay.
Yes,
and,
thank you, Catherine.
in response to that, we are in touch with the Corps of Engineers, and
Yeah.
we understand there is going to be a project that they're working on now. They're not to building stage, but it's on the Westport side, but they need to do some mitigation for that project. So what they were suggesting to us is they would do that mitigation on our side, on the back side of the sewer plant, so that we would have that protection. So
Yeah.
that made this piece of money that we have sort of redundant,
Okay.
and it couldn't be used on a project, quite like that. And it's not firmed up enough yet for us to use this within the time frame. So it just seemed logical to let it go back.
Yeah. So that would be the different scope type of thinking that would go on for help.
It's a different type of help, but
Right.
it would be, as I understand, free to us.
Yeah.
So we couldn't use the legislative money on that.
Well, that jetty along there has subsided a lot. So
So
timely.
can I ask a question? Has the Army Corps then, I think this is probably for the mayor, changed their direction that they were going to go in addressing, the whole jetty, because the erosion at the on the ocean side will still be there down the road also? Are they now just looking at it much differently as far as just the, what in regards to Westport and then helping the sewer plant out? Or have they changed their focus as far as the whole jetty goes?
No, they are still going forward with our project as it was envisioned. And it is one of those things that's, gets federal funding every term. But they have it for this year and they are going full bore on it. It slowed down a bit with the virus because they had people who couldn't travel and do things, but it's still on.
Great.
So it was in addition to that.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Are there any other questions surrounding the legislative appropriations? Okay, I think that as we move into the pending section, this may also clear up some questions that you had, Catherine, on row number 19. I worked with Nick and Jackson Blaylock from the Washington Sea Grant to submit a pre-application to FEMA in regard to CTP risk mapping. This is we requested, it's a pre-application. So we submit an executive summary and then they invite us to apply. They're reviewing those documents now, but this is in regard to a study to assess erosion issues and solutions at Marine View Drive. So this was to address the current erosion that occurred with the last severe storm that we had, and potential breaching of the floodgate and the erosion that we can continue to see there. So we're hoping to fund a study that will assess where the erosion is going, how far it's going to go, what are the major impacts to that, and what would be the appropriate solutions. So fingers crossed that we get invited to apply for that, because we really tried to illustrate a need there. And I do want to say, if perhaps we don't get funded or invited to apply, this concern will go down into my upcoming projects list. I will not stop seeking funding on it just because we didn't receive funding. Those concerns are always in the forefront of my mind. So if we get turned down for money, it's just a no at one place, but that doesn't mean that another area will not fund it or another funding agency. So that's row number 19. Row number 20, I just submitted on the 12th of this month, an application for 3 additional firefighters to the Staffing for Adequate Firefighting and Response Grant Program through FEMA. This is to fund 3 additional firefighters to operate the Southern Station, have enough staff to operate the Southern Station, and address decreasing the ISO rating. As we know, the community has faced some increase down at the southern tip of the peninsula, and it is the anticipation that these 3 additional hires will continue to aid the decrease of that rating. The risk assessment that the fire department had conducted said that we needed 6, but we wanted to only request enough that could be supported after the grant period ended instead of biting off more than we could chew. Row number 21 is the Department of Justice. And my apologies, I flipped these 2 funding agencies. I see an error. So I will correct that before I send it over to you, Sarah, to add to File Pro. But the Department of Justice Dennis Leary Bulletproof Vest Program is something that the police department applies for on a regular basis. It partially reimburses the expenses of bulletproof vests for the police department. We received an award close to $3,000, $2,939.90. This has not gone before council yet. That is why it's in the pending list, and it's anticipated to go to council the first meeting in April. Assistance to Firefighter 2020. That was an application I submitted in February. It says 2020 because they appropriate or obligate the funds in 2020 to be dispersed in 2021. So it's kind of an odd way that they have that set up, but that's how we identified those funds. This was in regard to new bunker gear, PPE, hoses, and valves. And there is a small cost match associated with that. The application was $131,976. It's very small type, so I'm pretty sure that's the amount with some change, and $6,284 approximately in match for that which the fire department has within their budget or has accessible for matching. Row number 23 is the Airport Coronavirus Response Grant Program. This was the second allocation of $9,000 that was approved by council at the last meeting. No, my apologies. This is going to council on 3/22/21. I forgot, I spoke about it at the agenda setting, not at council. So this is on the agenda to be discussed on Monday. And row number 24 is the Pre-Disaster Mitigation 2018 funding from FEMA. This is in regard to the vertical evacuation structure, and it is passed through Washington State EMD. It is in this pending area because the council approved the contract, and now we have to wait for the fully executed contract from Washington State EMD. They have been significantly understaffed and very busy with the coronavirus response. And so things are being delayed at their end a little bit more than normal. So I'm holding that in the pending area until we receive that fully executed contract back, and then I'll move it into the active section. It's just at that point, we cannot incur costs on it. Upcoming thought, is there any questions in regard to the pending section and applications that have been submitted thus far?
Yeah, just on the erosion part, when you say Marine View Drive, is that the new erosion that happened down just by Damon Point there?
Yes, and Nick has created a map to encompass that. We've kind of been referring to it as the Marine View Drive erosion because it's really encroaching. You know, it has really pushed that debris very close, very close to Marine View Drive. But I think it would essentially encompass all of that bay area.
Yeah, got it. Thanks.
And we are also in discussions with the Quinault about that erosion because it's certainly affecting their RV park resort there as well.
Are there any other questions in regard to pending applications? Okay, the next section is just a brief synopsis of upcoming projects that have come across my desk that I keep kind of a running list out for and just keep an eye out for, or potential applications that I know I will be applying for. So the first one on row number 27 is broadband connectivity. The mayor has asked us to look into increasing our broadband services to citizens within the city. When we worked with Nick Bird and he reached out to the internet providers in the area, it was realized that they had said we reach a certain speed that does not qualify us for the current grant funding that we were looking at. We exceed those speeds in areas of the city. We don't have any data in regard to that. We don't have any way to illustrate that. So I've been kind of looking into how can we assess that. And Grays Harbor PUD is conducting a connectivity speed test that residents can do from their home. And then Grays Harbor PUD collects that data and tells you at what rate we are actually running. I think there were only, I think it was 7 participants. It could be 7 or 17, I can't recall, but there were very few people who had actually participated in that study within city limits. That link can be found on the Grays Harbor PUD website, and I was hoping that we might be able to link that to our website here, so that way our citizens could start participating in that study so we could illustrate a need. Many of the people who have participated thus far are in the red zone, which means that they're not receiving very high speed quality. So I think that's a good place to start. You know, we have companies saying that we are being supplied accurate speeds or sustainable speeds, but it does not seem to appear that way when data is collected. So that's my suggestion at this point, is to kind of direct our citizens to that Grays Harbor PUD connectivity study. And it's about a 30-second study. I took it myself just to see what all of the parameters entailed. At the same time, I will continue to look for funding that is suitable for the city. Item number 28.
I have a comment. Can I have a comment
sure.
on that? I reached out to Derek Kilmer's office and to let them know that, you know, what's being said is available to us and what's really available to us are 2 different things, because so many of us are on laptops as opposed to being hardwired into the system and all of this stuff that, you know, you need for their connectivity. And they said they were hearing that all over the country. And so they are working on changing their parameters on these grants. So I appreciated that.
Yeah. The other thing that's kind of happening too is the FAA, or somebody gave SpaceX that $833 million for going into rural areas with Starlink. I actually have Starlink at my house, so going forward, that's going to also be a pretty huge factor for rural areas of broadband because their speeds are pretty high.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Mayor. Row number 28 is in regard to electric charging stations to fill gap in service for electric cars that visit the city. I'm actively seeking funds for electric charging stations. There's not a whole lot out there. DOT did issue some to major metropolises and cities that connected thoroughfares, but those were very populated cities. They had large populations. So, but I'm just keeping an eye out because it would behoove us to get some of those here. Also, I have some convention center projects that Diane just reached out to me in regard to. She would like to install a fresh waterways map, kind of a large map for the visitor center. She would like a photo op station to encourage people to get out and kind of enjoy the elements when the weather allows, and take a photo. It seems to do well in other places and kind of bring people to the center of town, wherever that may be. And she would like to install a large mural on the building. So I've been keeping my eye out for art grants, potential interpretive grants, and I might have some leads for her on that, but that is something that I'm keeping my eye out for. Row number 30 is in regard to records management. There is funding available through the Department of Commerce to assist municipalities with their records management, and this would be through the city clerk's office. Unfortunately, that avenue of funding is closed right now due to COVID-19 and the state needing to readdress their budget. I'm actively seeking funding for this. I've looked in other areas. There is federal funding, but the federal funding, they say they pass it on to the state, and we don't have any state funds right now, so we're in a little bit of a limbo mode. I think that I might be able to silo it out. That's why I have IE in parentheses to address digitization of historical city documents and retention. It could be perhaps that I might be able to find a grant specific to retention and then another specific to digitizing historical documents. So that's how I'm kind of approaching it now until that other avenue of funding becomes available through the state. Row number 31, this is a grant that we will be applying for through the state of Washington for the library. And this is to digitize the history of Ocean Shores. We will combine the two scopes from the previous funded projects. The first was digital history, where the library and Friends of the Library collected documents and collected photos and digitized those and added them to an archive system, and they are available electronically for viewing. And they also digitized the oral history of Ocean Shores with citizens that have been here for quite a long time. Now they'd like to combine those scopes so that way they can provide an audible history along with the document. And I think that's kind of an exciting endeavor. Row number 32 is the airport improvement plan. I'm getting ready to submit an application in regard to the actual obstruction removal. As we have received and completed the environmental assessment, we will be moving forward with the construction of the obstruction removal. This will address the design portion, and then in 2022, we will submit another application for the actual construction. We had hoped to submit it in one scope. Unfortunately, between the time that the FAA approves the environmental assessment and the grant period ends, we did not have enough time to put it out to bid, and it just didn't work out timeline-wise. So by splitting up the design and the construction, we will be able to submit a grant application to at least focus on the design of the obstruction removal. It is not anticipated to exceed this particular year. The design is not anticipated to exceed the $150,000 entitlement funds, which is an annual allocation. So I have addressed that in the airport budget as well, the necessary match associated with that. And then WSDOT would cover 5%. The grant application has not been created yet, but of course, once we receive award, that would go to council for approval. And that is all I have for you today. Something that I had thought about, that I had thought about adding to the list on upcoming projects was the previous storm. I believe there were some public assistance funds through FEMA available. And so that's also something that's been on my mind as well. And Nick has forwarded me some information on. So we will be reaching out to FEMA to receive assistance for some of those costs and damages associated with the ice storm. Are there any other questions in regard to upcoming projects?
Go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say this is hugely helpful and really appreciate it. So a lot of good work and helps me to understand what's pending, what's coming, what the potential is. So thank you very much for doing this. Very good.
I second that completely. I'd love to see this done maybe on a quarterly basis and the spreadsheet made available, sent out to the council. I was thinking about the request for signage, interpretive signage that Diane chatted with you about. And I was reflecting back to a trip, oh gosh, a long time ago, looking at interpretive signs on beach walks. And I noticed, and you probably know this, Sarah, so forgive me if I'm being redundant, but NOAA actually funded a lot of the signs, as did the Department of Agriculture, which I thought was interesting, maybe because they're interested in fish, but possible avenues there. Particularly NOAA kind of surprised me, but they are sea people, so.
I was typing that. I thought we might have some notes come out from this meeting, so I wanted to make reference of that. I don't know that NOAA has funded signage before, but it's certainly something that I can look into. Yeah. Other things that we have discussed have been Wayfair signing. I mean, upcoming projects, that could go on and on. You know, we've had a lot of discussions surrounding a lot of different things. So I know that that is a living document, and we can continuously add to that. So when you have ideas or whatnot, send them to the mayor, and she can certainly forward them on to me or to Scott.
Yeah, yeah,
that's a great idea. Though I would
also.
Are there any other questions in regard to these upcoming projects?
I just want to say thank you so much, Sarah. I know you've been super busy and this just proves it. So
thank you.
I'll get you on the list for quarterly updates. I think this was really helpful and sounds like it's very good information to share, and a lot of it ends up at the council level. So it's nice to have a heads up that they're coming down the road. So thank you.
Thank you. And if it's okay, I'd like to stick around for the mayor's update in regard to the ARP funding. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, that'll hit your plate eventually too, I think.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Sarah.
All right, Chief, are you ready?
I am ready. I'm not like Sarah. I only have one thing to update you on, and that is the EMS levy and what's going on in the fire department over here. As you heard from Angie earlier, this is pretty important to emergency care. We're really looking for this to pass. The election is coming up on the 27th. We do need to have at least a 50% pass on this levy. The last one was done in 2016, and it expires this year, and we'll have to get this one through, and if it passes, it will get us by until 2027. So we'll have 6 years on this that we don't have to look at it again. The update from the department over here, I've been talking to the firefighters union, and what they're going to do to help us out on this for this election is they're going to place signs throughout the city. They plan on doing a mailer out to the citizens in the city on the information what this levy is. It's important to let them know this is not a new levy. This is a renewal of the current levy. So it's not a new tax on them. The other things they want to do is a radio announcement And they want to make certain that everyone understands they are not going to go door to door on this one. Of course, with COVID and the reaction we got last time, them doing door to door, they are not going to do it. And then the only other thing they're planning on doing is on election day, they're going to go ahead and wave signs out there at the medium out there, the roundabout, and to promote for the vote yes on the EMS levy. That's basically all I have on that. And Angie might have some financials that might help you better. If I can answer any other questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate the important thing that this is not a new tax. It's just the replacement of a 50-cent levy that we started back in 2016. I can't get that news out enough. I don't want people to think that this is new. It's not, it's just a renewal. So that's a very important message to share. The funding is pretty critical to our department. The estimated revenue starting in 2022 is about $800,000 a year, which is equal to about 6 full-time fire and EMS positions. So when we're talking about adding 3 more because we can't afford 6, to have to cut 6 would be a big hit to our department. So it's very, very important on the revenue aspect of this. Just want to talk about, I know we always get the questions of, is this money just going to go in the general fund and what can you use it for? And the answer is we absolutely have to use it for emergency care purposes. It goes into our Fund 104, which is how we've done it since 2016. It does not go into the general fund. There's an RCW that specifically says that it can only be used for emergency medical services. So just want to put that point across as well. It does not just go into the general fund bucket for anything that we want to use it for. It is for our EMS service. And like Chief said, we need a 50%, just a majority, because it's a renewal levy. If we were running a new levy or a different rate, we would be required to have a super majority of 60%. But since it's the same rate, same levy, it's just a 50% approval rate required. So any questions for us? Catherine?
I do, and it's actually along the lines of the emergency. One of the things that we know, I was on a county call, and the Grays Harbor Transit used to support EMS funding. They had a finding that said you can't do that anymore. So it's my understanding that the county's going to pick up 60% of the EMS training funding, but cities are going to have to pick up the other 40%. So I'm wondering, we have public safety tax money, I think 0.3%, and there's another 0.1%. How are we thinking about chipping in our share of that training? I know it must be important to the firefighters and EMTs and paramedics to get that training. And right now EMS has no funding coming in. 911 system has no funding coming in. They're relying on grants. So have there been discussions, and what are we thinking about that?
There are discussions going on, and there is a bill in the legislature that would allow us to use some of that 0.3% for public safety for EMS as well, because this is generally EMS training, I think, not fire. And so we're waiting to see if that passes through. It looks really positive. It has been doing well. And it's one of those things, though, and that's where the county would get their 60% that they are going to pay. That's coming out of their share that they get, because they get the larger portion of that 0.3%.
Right.
And the thing I didn't like about this is it's us shuffling our money around and taking on the load at the county and city level, that was something that transit, and I'm on the transit board, but transit, you know, they campaigned for the money they got because it was going to include this. They used that as a sales technique, and they'll continue to get that 200,000 a year. And that doesn't seem very fair to me, that we have to pick it up out of what we're already getting. We have to just move some of it away from police to there, or we have to fund it separately. But it is what it is, and at least gives us a mechanism to support Grace Harbor EMS. And sorry,
So-
Mike, you had something more?
No, I was just going to support you. Exactly what you said is what's happening. We just really don't know what's going to happen right now. The bill is out there up at Capitol, in the Capitol. We don't know what percentage we're going to end up with and how it's going to get split. What portion is going to go to county departments, what county portions are going to go to the city departments, and how is that going to be? You know, are we going to split it equally, or is it going to be split among personnel? Just don't know the answers to that yet. So
I will say too, for the immediate need, the mayor did add a $10,000 transfer into the EMS fund to help offset that revenue that we lost. So at least for the next couple years, the mayor thought ahead and did that transfer to help with that piece of it for the immediate need until we get the rest figured out.
So then the
Right,
public.
But we don't know if it's going to be enough. So anyway, sorry,
Right.
Catherine.
I'm sorry. So the public safety tax at 0.3% goes into the general fund, is that right?
That's correct.
And this funding problem is a part of it seems to me 104. Is that why the transfer, was it from 101 to 104 to sort of pick that up? Does the funding for EMS come from 104?
It was a general fund, so it went from 001 to 104. So general fund into EMS.
Yeah.
Until we get the rest of it figured out, then we'll have to decide how we book it, basically. But right now, all of the 3/10 money goes into the general fund because it's for police purposes, and that's where our police budget is spent out of.
All right. And I know there are expenses that are listed as, that you specify as 0.3, but is there a percentage of that funding that goes to salaries as sort of as an allocation, or does it go to pay for one person's salaries on the police department? How does that part work?
I know that when we first got the 3/10 money, I believe we added the part-time code enforcement. We added a few positions as a result, and everything's kind of changed since we first started, because we talked about a detective position, but then we added an officer position. So yes, part of it does, it was used to create some new positions to help the police department. And then the rest you'll see is kind of just expensed by line item, like operating supplies and equipment and things like.
Seems like it'd be helpful to have a line item to sort of indicate what salaries or positions go into that, or even if it's an allocation of 2% of the overall cost of wages is paid for out of that. If there were a separate line item, it seems like it'd be more easy to follow. And maybe then by doing that, we could have a conversation about supporting EMS training, supporting the training we need to do if that funding doesn't come through, if that bill doesn't go through, if we at least knew what we have besides what we're spending. I suspect we're getting a lot more than we're spending specific. I mean, I know we're spending it all, but we're not specifying that this 0.3% is being spent on this salary and that salary, and maybe in the future, this amount for EMS for the training pieces. Just thinking that it'd be helpful to have a line item on that, on salaries.
Okay.
That Angie, where or Chief, where, when and where will it be posted on the levy, the numbers on what you're going to be asking for?
When is it going? Well,
Well, because obviously the city cannot campaign and cannot put a position for or against with it, but there are numbers of just what, like Angie, that you talked about, this is a replacement, how much it's going, the average citizen is going to get charged and stuff like that. So is that going to be posted someplace on the city website?
I believe the union firefighters are going to put that out as an informational flyer, and they're
Okay.
going out the mail. When are they going to do it exactly? I don't have that answer for you. That's something I need to sit down with them still and find out what dates have they set up. They are pretty, they understand that the election's coming right up, and I think they have an outline. It's, one of those things, I'm not allowed to be in the union meetings.
Right.
So I don't have those answers for you right now, but I know sitting down talking to Corey Cool and Joe Hoffman. Joe Hoffman's kind of leading the show on this one. He's pretty much on the ball. I can find those answers out for you here soon, but I don't have that information, what the dates are.
I
If
think
we had
ballots are
that,
gonna
that-
drop pretty soon.
Pardon?
I'm sorry, I apologize, John.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that if we had that, the citizens would, just so we could have, we're not making up numbers. I mean, that we actually have what the hard numbers are. I think that would make it easier for if some citizens wanted to support the levy.
Mhm.
And what I started to say is ballots should be dropping the first week in April, shouldn't they? That's coming right up.
Sarah, did you ever confirm with the auditor's office when the ballots will be out?
I did
We had-
several weeks ago. I want to say he said 3 weeks ahead of time.
I think
Yes.
that's what we talked about.
Yeah,
I heard something about that.
I can reconfirm, but I did do that a couple weeks ago and have since forgot.
So that would be around April 6th.
Yeah, I want to say that that was about the time, and I remember distinctly about 3 weeks because he said that's true, because it's 4 weeks if it's military, 3 weeks for the general public.
Yeah, and I have some speaking notes, obviously, that I prepared to, and we can post those with the finance committee documents that talk about the revenue and the fact that it's not a new tax and things like that. We just have to be very careful that it's just a fact sheet and not a yes, vote for this or no, don't vote for
Right,
this.
no, and that's what I would like on just fact-based. And then Senator Wilson is the one that's actually carrying the bill to make that change. And so far, there's not been a lot of opposition to it. So I'm optimistic that they'll get that, because it's in their mind, I mean, all of our minds, it's a small change because they support firefighters, it's just not EMS. And really, especially in rural, both are the same.
And it's not going to cost them anything more.
Yeah.
But generally, yes, we have had an informational sheet that we would put out at the library and other public places that people could pick up. And you're right, it has to be not persuasive, it's just setting out the facts.
April, if I can, I just looked it up. April 9th is the start of the 18-day voting period. So that means, I believe it means that they have to be in houses by the Friday before that.
So the second.
Somewhere around that. Yes, somewhere around the 2nd.
All right. All right, anything? Oh, Chief left. He's out.
Bye-bye, Chief.
I guess he's done. Okay, Mayor, you're up.
All right. We did have a discussion of the mayors and the commissioners with Derek Kilmer's office, and he had several of his people there to help us. And he indicated that there is going to be considerable help for the smallest of businesses. And he indicated that they recognized that those little businesses didn't really get much help last time. So they're making a real effort to do that this time. So we're going to want to see what they're doing there. That'll be helpful to know. They also are trying to smooth out some things like the Paycheck Protection Program and the unemployment things and all of that so that it goes more smoothly. Said they were just so unprepared for this. They're looking at community development block grant programs, and there is a separate pot of money for that. That could be helpful. They said that they don't have any information yet on PILF fund grants, but that too would be useful. One of the things with the new package that we will get, and we'll get, I think, 1,410,000. I'm not sure if it is all in 1 year or we get that over a 2-year period. That'll make a difference in how we do this. But they're interested in us having the ability to use some of that money for infrastructure, in particular water, sewer, and broadband. The idea is that having strength in those areas makes us more resilient so that when a crisis hits, we're in better shape. And I certainly agree with that. They also encourage, helping people stay employed. Well, one of the things that we did last year was lay some people off, cut some people back, all of that sort of thing. They're hoping by giving us more money this year that none of us will have to do that. So we won't have massive unemployment. That could happen. And they said that there will be transportation funds that they'll be making available out of the Highway Trust Fund. And it's for big, maybe up to 5-year projects, but that it would be available, and it's something that we could use for smaller projects, not small, but smaller locally. And that we would want to make sure that we had letters of support and that sort of thing for that. So this is going to be a different rollout. It's really an opportunity for us to have more latitude in the spending so that we can, help more and help in ways that we simply couldn't before, because the last money was much more structured. So we'll be talking about this as we go along. It seemed to me that once we really have the sort of final, here's what it is, here's how it's going to roll out, that sort of thing, that we might want to put together a sort of list of things that we think would be valuable. And then we can prioritize that list and really make sure that we spend the money wisely, and that we're doing the best we can for our citizens and the businesses as well. If in fact they're not being taken care of by the other funding mechanisms they're putting in place, because they're putting a lot of things together all at once. So I was really excited about this. I think it is a lot of money for us, and it gives us an opportunity to do more. The money we had last time, though it seemed like an adequate amount. Largely went for PPE and feeding people and that sort of thing. And this, we're in a different place now. So this will really be recovery money as opposed to sort of ongoing dealing with the crisis money. So we'll do our best to work on this and take input from everybody and see if we can't do a really bang up job on doing this. And of course, we'll lean heavily on people like Angie and Sarah Bisson to track all of this for us. And, there's a lot of calling the agencies and getting permissions, how are you interpreting this? And it all takes time and effort, but they did a great job with the CARES program. And I know that they'll do the same kind of great job with this program. So that's all I have really on that. It's not a huge amount. We keep getting more information, but it's, a few hundred pages of document itself. So it's got everything, including a kitchen sink in there.
If I can just say, I do hope that we figure out a way of supporting businesses. If it means having Greater Grace Harbor or whatever, as the county did, administer some funds, that we set aside some of our funds to support our little businesses, regardless of what the feds do. The process that they have to go through is sometimes daunting for somebody who's a sole proprietor. And I hope, I really hope that with this round, we support our businesses. They're a big bunch of sales tax revenue for us, and I'd hate to see that go away.
Well, and I think one of the things that we might consider doing is setting up someone who would help them to get their applications in. I mean, there's just all sorts of ways you can help. And that would be one of those ways, especially for those folks that this is a whole new thing, putting in for grants for them. So we'll just keep, keep thinking about what we can do. And certainly through John, we're in touch with the Greater Grace Harbor. And you're right, they've done a splendid job of putting things out there and taking on that task. And we'll see what they want to do this year and what we want to do. We need to make what we do as meaningful as possible. So we'll just see where that is. Anything else on that one?
That if
Okay.
I just may say, I agree with you, Catherine, and supporting our businesses are important. Greater Grace Harbor has been working hard and trying to get all the answers. And there's a lot of Working Washington 4 that's coming out. And so that I think that it's important for us to see what Working Washington 4 is, because there's going to be some things, and then maybe we structure whatever ours is to support Working Washington 4. There's a lot of stuff in there, but I think in talking to, we went back and reached out to some of the business that did not get funding. And one of the things that we did discover that many of them had filled out the forms incorrectly because they didn't know, and a lot of them because they don't have accountants. I mean, they're just scribbling things on the piece of paper. So Greater Grace Harbor and the Ocean Shores branch of Greater Grace Harbor, one of our focuses is to get to people and give them assistance on how to navigate the forms with it. But I agree with you. I think that as the money comes up, that we should look at the businesses and see if there's opportunities that we can assist them. And it may be in a little bit different way than what Working Washington 4 is, whether it be off-season grant or something like that. But top priority for me also.
Well, remember, I think if you remember, little business, these businesses are when you're talking about the federal funding or even Working Washington state funding, they're competing against a whole bunch of other businesses. And I would like our focus and a lot of our funding to go to our businesses in town here. You know, they're competing against a whole bunch of other businesses, and as you said, John, that can be very daunting for these guys. They're not, you know, they're not big franchisees that have a you know, a background and a bunch of people nationally that can help them. So there's a lot of them I talk to are struggling. They're having a hard time, and I'd like us to consider them in this funding.
Yep, I agree. And I just think that we need to make sure that we, again, make it meaningful to them. Because it's one-time funding. And when it's gone, it's gone. And if we can make them stronger, that's a way of doing it. And how we do that, I'm not sure yet. And I think that we've talked a little bit about making sure that we communicate really well with the businesses and understand what they feel they need, and go from there. So we'll be working on that. There's a lot of challenges coming up. Okay, anything else on that? Okay, then the other thing I wanted to talk just a little bit about is the mayor and council member handbook. And it's online at MRSC. And they also have something that has roles. And I think it's something that we need to talk about. I heard a lot of things. I apologize. I did not listen to your retreat, but I heard a lot of things about things that were said there. And I think that we need to all make sure that we stay in our own lanes as far as control. Control seemed to be a big word for the retreat with some folks. And I think it's important that we understand our roles really well, and that the council's role, particularly in budgeting, is to pass that budget and to then, you know, look at the bids as they come back and do the things that we do. But it's not to help us spend the money in that sense. That's really the mayoral role. So I think there are a lot of things that are already out there that will help us to work better together. I think it's a strength that we need to work on, because it's better for our community if we're working together and not working at cross purposes. But it's also better for our community if we work in the areas that we're supposed to and don't infringe on one another. So we'll have a lot of discussions about that, I think. But I will send this document to you, and I will also send the roles document, which I have found it's briefer and it's useful too. And that's really all I have on that subject. If anybody has anything else. Okay, Angie?
I think we're done. I will Mayor, I will send you the levy fact sheet as well as the aging reports to send out to council, and then we'll get those to Sarah to post with the finance committee documents. We'll also make sure we post Sarah's grant summary, and we might as well just post the MRSC handbook while we're at it, since
Yep.
Post everything that we've talked about.
Or at least put a link to it.
Exactly. So, and then our next meeting is Thursday, April 22nd at 10 a.m. And I think that's it. Anybody have anything?
Yeah, Angie, if you could make sure that we have all the documents put together, send it to all council members so we have it. And I don't know when Sarah is going to post the video, but if we could also include the link to the video there, that way council can see it. and they can look at everything at their leisure, and they know where to go.
Sounds good. I will see you guys on Monday.
All right,
Good job.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
You too.
everybody.
Appreciate it.
Have a nice weekend, y'all.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you.